Hello, and welcome to the webinar on Building Community for Wildfire Resilience. My name is Aaron Groth, and I am your host, the Regional Fire Specialist for the Coast with Oregon State University's Extension Fire Program. This webinar is part of a webinar series meant to help prepare Oregonians for the wildfire season. Today, this webinar explores how different communities have found different ways to prepare for wildfire. Overall, the webinar series aims to address preparedness on 3 levels: individual, community, and the landscape. Coming up, we'll have a session on Ready, Set, Go. We'll talk about fire in the landscape, specifically fire ecology and fire behavior, then what to do or expect when a fire hits, and our last session will cover recovery after a fire. It is our intention to provide broad level information in these webinars and then provide local online meetings that will dial this information in for your area or county. And because you signed up for this webinar, you will receive information for those area specific meetings, so stay tuned and feel free to visit the online webinar guide for updates. Public service announcement. Our partners at the Oregon Department of Forestry have asked us to advise the public. Please exercise extreme caution if pile burning. Consider chipping or recycling yard debris. It may be best to cover the pile and wait until better conditions prevail. The fire team has compiled some resources for the public that will be included in your information packet. The Oregon Department of Forestry says the number of small wildfires has tripled this spring, partly because of dry conditions across the state, according to the Associated Press. Clackamas County on Tuesday said that it had implemented a backyard burn ban. Polk, Marion, and Washington counties announced their burn bans as well. Logistics. Okay, before we begin the presentations, I have some webinar logistics that I'd like to quickly cover. This session is being recorded and all webinar recordings can be found on the FNR YouTube channel. We are also streaming live on the Extension's Facebook page. There is the closed captioning feature, so hopefully you are all seeing that at the bottom of your screens. If you do not want to see the captioning, simply go to live transcript and hide subtitles. For the people tuning into the webinar on Zoom, your audio has been muted. If you are having audio troubles, you are connected to your computer's audio, I suggest hanging up and dialing in with your phone. You can always post a question in the chat window if you are having technical difficulties. If you have a question on the information that is being presented, please type your question into the Q&A window. We have limited time, but we will do our best to answer your questions live. If you don't catch all the information presented, don't worry. We will provide all of the resources and links mentioned during this webinar on our fire program website, and we'll even follow up with an email just to be sure you get the information. Okay, let's get this webinar started. I want to first introduce Kara Baylog and Amanda Brenner. Kara is our moderator for today and is a FNR Extension Program Coordinator. Amanda is our co-host today and is a Forestry and Natural Resource Extension Program Coordinator as well. Our 5 presenters today will introduce themselves and their area and will speak to what their community did, tangible benefits their community received, what it took for the community to organize and do it, and potential contacts or steps for others to take if you want to do the same thing. We have panelists from different areas and communities across the state. We also have panelists on the line to assist with questions, including some of the new Extension Fire Program team. Take it away, Kara.
Thank you, Aaron. As mentioned, we have 5 panelists today to give their take on how their community comes together to become fire adapted. Fire adapted refers to communities where citizens are informed and are collaboratively planning to take action to coexist safely with fire. We recognize, however, that each community is different and different communities interact and engage in different ways. There is no one way that a community must interact in order to become fire adapted. People can work through informal collaborations, with most people being responsible for work on their own properties, all the way up to community members working together as part of organizations or pushing for projects through local government action. No matter how you come together, when work on the ground is getting done and neighbors are thinking about how to prepare for wildfire, communities will benefit. For today, we're going to start off with talking about more informal collaborations, and at the end with more integrated collaborations. Try to think about what might work better in your community. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our first speaker, Rob Guttridge.
Hi, I'm Rob Guttridge, and I'm a landowner and active in the community of Springwater, Oregon, in Clackamas County. It's a rural area. There are BLM lands and industrial forest lands nearby. There are lots of farms around, and I really kind of came to the forestry through farming background as well. And because of that, I was aware of our local conservation district, Soil and Water Conservation District, and through them, the Natural Resources Conservation Service programs of the USDA. And one of the programs that they offer is Environmental Quality Incentive Program, which is cost share to assist landowners in doing improvements that benefit the environment on their farm and forest land. I didn't realize at first that forestry was well covered, but it is, as it turns out. And so that's a resource that is available pretty much everywhere in the state. If you are in an area where forestry is something that is a viable activity, you may be eligible to get cost share assistance in doing improvements on your property. Now, I wanted to do wildfire prevention, risk reduction activities, which would also be viable forestry activities. On the screen is a little picture on the edge of where I was pruning a very thick patch of young trees. And since that picture was taken, I have further thinned that patch. My own experience and observations were that you want to get your fuels down and your living tree canopy up so that you have a good separation and don't get fire spreading from wherever it may be to your growing trees. A lot of people think, oh, well, that's a great thing to do, but gee, it takes so much time, it's expensive, I don't get paid for it, I only get paid when I can sell the trees, and that won't happen for quite a while. Well, for wildfire risk prevention, for a lot of other good reasons, it's valuable to make those changes to your forest, to do some pruning, do some thinning. And the good news is that you can get some assistance. They won't pay all your costs. They won't pay you to do something you wouldn't do otherwise, but they will help you. And because you're working with them on a conservation plan, which is part of getting your assistance, you have to have a conservation plan in place. You'll be on a schedule to get it done instead of putting it off indefinitely. So there's benefits. It's bureaucracy because it's the federal government, but it's not too onerous. And my experience was that my local NRCS agent has been very helpful in guiding me through the hoops that need to be done to get into the program, to develop the plan of action and put it in place and make things happen. And a few checks have come in, which have made it a little better in terms of doing the work that certainly wasn't paid for by any sales of material from the property. And I've shown off that work a little bit to our Oregon Small Woodlands Association. We had a neighbor to neighbor tour for everybody owning woodlands in Clackamas County that wanted to attend. Share the information through the Grange, which is something I'm active in as a rural landowner, and that's fairly widespread for us old folks, at least. If we're involved in farming and forestry, we're often involved in Grange chapters as well. That's a local community activity that's fairly widespread. It depends where you are, what community you have to share with, but I believe in leading by example, and so I'm kind of proud of what I've done and what I'm continuing to do. So I'm happy to share that information with others as well. And that's really what I have to say. I don't need to go on any further. I'll be happy to take questions at the end of the program. Thank you.
Hey, thank you very much, Rob. Really appreciate you sharing your experience. And next we'll move on to Mike Eng. Thank you very much. Mike joined us from Lostline Canyon Firewise community in Northeastern Oregon. Thank you very much.
Hi there, everyone. My name is Mike Eng, and I'm the designated resident leader for our Lostline Canyon Firewise community, which is located up in beautiful Wallowa County in Northeast Oregon. I've been asked to tell you a little bit about how we came to be the first Firewise community in this part of Oregon. Wallowa County is about 2 million acres or so, with a population of just over 7,000 people. About 3/5 of the county is publicly owned and administered by a variety of federal, state, and local agencies. It's mostly mountainous and lots of elevation change that determines the local environmental conditions, including the amount and distribution of precipitation, which in turn affects wildfire behavior as well as the options that we have for fighting a wildfire. This multi-agency land ownership within Wallowa County has resulted in a long history of cooperation amongst those agencies and all the employees in both preventing and fighting wildfires. I'm telling you all this because this history of interagency cooperation is really an important foundation for how our little unincorporated community of just about 110 landowners was able to become Northeast Oregon's first Firewise community. Although Wallowa County had completed its first Community Wildfire Protection Plan, or CWPP as they're sometimes called, back in 2006, the plan had become greatly outdated following a decade of additional new federal, state, and local laws and policies, and then changing demographics here in the county, new concerns about more and more homes being built in an expanding wildland-urban interface. In addition, due to advances in technology, land managers now had many more remote sensing and mapping tools for analyzing forest conditions and identifying areas with different wildfire risks. So the updating of the county's Community Wildfire Protection Plan began in 2016 through a multi-agency steering committee effort. And during that analysis, we were identified as a community at risk, and that our risk from wildfire was extreme. This map shows Wallowa County. Lostline Canyon is the circled area in the lower left. That dark maroon indicates an extreme fire risk. When the revised Community Wildfire Protection Plan was still in its draft stage, the chair of the steering committee reached out to me and asked if I could check with our neighbors and see if they would be interested in learning more about the specific wildfire risk to our community. And if so, could I organize a presentation to our community members? Well, little did I know that this initial organizing effort would eventually lead to me becoming an enthusiastic local champion for the Firewise program. Just about 4 years ago to the day, 23 of our community members met with 11 federal, state, and local agency folks to hear about their analysis of our particular risk from wildfire. This data-driven and largely maps-based presentation of just that section of the new plan that pertained to the Lostline Canyon had really a profound effect on many of our community members. Second slide, please. Here's a map of just our Lostline Canyon community, and you can see that we're surrounded by dark maroon, indicating an extreme risk from wildfire. This presentation became the catalyst that grabbed the attention of our residents and motivated us to learn more about what we could do to prevent and prepare for a wildfire, given the extreme wildfire risk to our community, which was clearly demonstrated by the data. When we asked, what can we do? Their response was, well, consider becoming a Firewise community, and we'll help you do it. Since none of us had previously heard about Firewise, Wallowa Resources, which is a local non-governmental organization focused on promoting rural economies through sustainable land stewardship, and one of the partners in developing that revised community wildfire protection plan, they offered to meet with interested community members to help us learn more about the Firewise program, what are the benefits, and what would be involved in us becoming a Firewise community. While I recruited potentially interested members of our community, Wallowa Resources prepared an informational presentation and led an initial discussion about Firewise, which my wife and I hosted around our kitchen table in November of 2017. Following that meeting, the 10 community members attending decided that they definitely wanted us to become a Firewise community, and they decided to take the next step. Losing no time, we met again in January 2018 to learn what's involved in conducting a community wildfire risk assessment. Fortunately, we were offered generous assistance by staff from Wallowa Resources and the other partner agencies behind Wallowa County's Community Wildfire Protection Plan, especially folks from the Oregon Department of Forestry. This was going to be Northeast Oregon's first Firewise effort, and so we were going to learn together. Wallowa Resources also invited one of the folks involved in establishing a Firewise group in the Pine Creek community, south of John Day and Grant County, to speak to us about their experience with Firewise. And they had a pretty impressive story to tell. In 2015, the Canyon Creek Complex wildfire burned more than 110,000 acres in Grant County and destroyed over 43 homes. However, every home in the Pine Creek community, which had joined the Firewise programs a couple years before, survived the flames, even though the forests around them had been incinerated. So together with our county partners, we completed a community wildfire risk assessment, which is one of the requirements of the program. Most of the community members who engaged in this effort from the start volunteered to be on a Firewise committee, thus meeting another requirement of the program. We presented a draft of our wildfire risk assessment to 25 members of our community and solicited their ideas and suggestions for how to address the most prominent risks that we had identified. Our newly established Firewise committee was then able to rather easily translate those suggestions into a 2-year action plan, which is another requirement of the program. And on the National Community Wildfire Preparedness Day that May, we conducted our first community workshop on assessing wildfire vulnerabilities of a home that was volunteered to us by an owner to use as a learning experience. The workshop was led by a retired fire chief who, fortunately for us, had recently moved to the neighborhood. We were able to check off another requirement of the Firewise program. We easily met the requirement of investing 1 hour of volunteer time, or $24.14 per property, by residents attending one of our workshops, for example, or working on their own to create defensible space around their homes, or by implementing other Firewise practices. We could also credit the cost of a homeowner hiring a contractor to do the work. Thus far, we've had 43 different residents participate in our Firewise activities. And having met all the fairly minimum requirements, we completed the online application, and in June 2019, we were approved as the first nationally recognized Firewise community in Northeast Oregon. In summary, the analysis from our county's updated community wildfire protection plan made it clear to many of our community members that we lived in a fire-prone landscape with a long history of periodic wildfires, and the risk to us from wildfire was currently extreme due to the amount of fuels that have built up over the years in the forest lands surrounding and in many cases encroaching on our homes. Last slide, please. Last slide, please. So in summary, Firewise is a national program that draws upon a wide range of expertise related to protecting homes from wildfire. and from those communities most experienced in living with and adapting to fire-prone environments. The specific strategies adopted by any community are completely customizable to meet the particular risks, conditions, desires, and priorities of that community. Firewise has available a huge resource library of wildfire-related information, flyers, and handout materials to provide to your community members, as well as short and often dramatic videos explaining some of the key principles. Participation by homeowners is completely voluntary. The Firewise group can start with a small group of interested landowners and build from there as other neighbors become more familiar with the benefits. The specific requirements to qualify as a Firewise community are fairly minimal, especially when you enlist the help of agency partners who are eager to assist. Becoming a Firewise group is a great opportunity for community building, with neighbors working together towards a common goal to protect their own homes and to help their communities survive a wildfire. Firewise is really a great organizing framework for helping a community develop a plan for how they can prepare for a wildfire and hopefully limit the damage to their community from a wildfire event. Happy to take any questions later on.
Hey, thank you very much, Mike. Appreciate your participation. Next up, we have Rich Fairbanks. Rich, please take it away.
Hi. I own a little bit of land in the Little Applegate watershed, south of Jacksonville, Oregon, Southwest Oregon. And because I worked in fire for many years and people knew that, I had a conversation with a couple of my neighbors right after the fire that burned Paradise is called the Camp Fire. And one of those neighbors was active in the Small Woodlands Association down here. And another was planning for controlled burning on his 40 acres up in Griffin Creek. And we talked about the Camp Fire that burned Paradise. And 85 people died in that fire, many while evacuating in their cars. We all agreed that the Little Applegate faced similar potential problems with evacuation. So we wondered about our main roads, our evacuation routes, Griffin Lane, Sterling Creek Road, even Highway 238, a state highway. Could they handle a sudden influx of hundreds of frightened drivers evacuating through smoke and even flame while busloads of firefighters and equipment tried to get in to attack the fire? So I also knew, in addition to the evacuation question, I was also very aware from my own experience that most fires are stopped at a road. A road is basically, 20 feet or so of mineral soil, of non-flammable material. And since our local roads would probably serve as fire lines, are the verges of the road clear to surface fuels? Have the limbs been pruned up? Is there a good line of sight so crews can see spot fires starting up behind them? If not, we have obviously a lot of work to do for successful both evacuation and firefighting. And it's not only that roads make really good fire lines, but they also make really good anchor points. If you're going to attack a fire, you need to start from someplace that's relatively safe, non-flammable. And that is very often a road. Use them as anchor points in addition to being fire lines. So it's pretty important from evacuation point of view, from the point of view of a fire line, and also from the point of view of we have a tremendous backlog of controlled burning to do here in the Little Applegate, and well, pretty much everywhere I know of in the mixed conifer forest. So we formed a group, and we formed a group to get strategic about wildfire. One of the problems with fuel treatment in this part of the world is it tends to be just wherever there was a timber sale or a thinning or whatever, you do the cleanup. But it's not strategic. It doesn't look at specific roads, ridges, places where it would be really good to stop a fire. But since there's been no fuel treatment done, it becomes a big problem. So we formed a group called Prescription for Safety. And this was just some of us. The total mailing list is up to like a dozen people in the area. So it's a small group. It's definitely community-based in the Little Applegate. And we focused on implementing strategic fuel treatments along critical evacuation routes for the area. And this slide that is showing, I hope it's showing for you guys, is a perfect example of what we've got. We've got an older stand of ponderosa pine, black oak, white oak, and underneath it has grown up as an artifact of fire suppression, this very dense thicket of small trees with finely divided fuels all the way to the ground, perfect ladder fuels. So we knew we had a problem. We wanted to get strategic critical evacuation routes, and by identifying roads that can serve as both evacuation routes and fuel breaks, fire lines, we can help contain wildfires and get people out without getting into these traffic jam situations and people being killed in their cars. And this strategic treatment, of course, also greatly facilitates controlled burns. In partnership with these property owners, non-government organizations that we've contacted and schmoozed with, government agencies, and some fire professionals, Prescription for Safety is planning to bring in funding and implement roadside fuel work. All we're really talking about is thinning within about 2 chains. There's some good scientific evidence that amount of distance will substantially change fire behavior. If there's fuel treatment along that road, it will tend to make the fire a lot less, slower resistance, a slower rate of spread, lower resistance to control. And we started small. We deliberately just kept it to the Little Applegate, even though there's been a lot of inquiries. For now, we kept it to the Little Applegate. And we tried to manage fuel, get money to manage fuels along 3 arterial roads in the Little Applegate drainage. At some point, we hope to branch out to collector roads, smaller roads in the Little Applegate, and perhaps to other drainages. And we work with the help of Extension. Extension gives us a lot of help. KS Wild, that's a conservation group down here. The Southern Oregon Forest Restoration Collaborative, SOFRIC, Oregon Department of Forestry, and of course, your federal tax dollars. We did get tentative approval of a grant for $80,000. We've signed up 30-something landowners who own property along these roads. This is all private land, by the way. And we've got some real enthusiastic participation by the community. So it does look like we're going to get somewhere with this. And to summarize, Prescription for Safety works to provide egress. Brushing out roadsides should be the normal thing to do. Fire lines and anchor points. We got to get strategic about fuel treatment. So fire lines and anchor points. And finally, a safer environment for an increase in prescribed fire. And that's it.
Well, thank you very much, Rich. We really appreciate you sharing your experience with us. Next up, we have Lucy Allison with the Gorse Action. I will let Lucy introduce herself. Thank you very much, Rich.
Great. My name is Lucy Allison. I am the Noxious Weeds Coordinator at Coos Watershed Association in Coos Bay, Oregon. I'm on the South Coast. So our organization is designed, our mission is to contribute to watershed health and economic stability on the South Coast, particularly in the Coos watershed. And my program, I deal with weeds and restoration projects here on the South Coast. And I'm going to be talking a little bit about the Gorse Action Group. which I am a contributor. My organization is a contributor, and how this group formed. So this group had its beginnings in 2010, down in the county south of us in Curry County. This was in 2010. It was formed by the Lower Rogue Watershed Council, which formed the Curry Wildfire Preparation Team. So at that point, that group identified that Gorse was a huge problem, potential catastrophic problem for wildfires. The city abandoned and other areas have burned in several big fires over the last 100 years. So targeting Gorse as a group was one of the first steps. So meetings started to form around how to control Gorse. And that was when the Gorse Action Group had its beginnings in 2015. So the Gorse Action Group has many contributors, among them the watersheds, Coos Watershed, Coquille Watershed, Curry Watersheds, as well as the City of Bandon, ODA, OSU, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, different contractors, ODOT, and many others, Wild Rivers Coast Alliance. So we have a lot of different stakeholders, and one of our missions is to do on the ground work. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about the nuts and bolts of, how we operate as a group. So first of all, we have an identifiable problem, which is gorse. Gorse is a nasty plant. For those of you who don't know what it is, it has oils that can, once they are ignited, they can burn for weeks at a time. They can spontaneously combust. It's very hard to control once they do set fire. So that is our target issue that we work towards. So with the stakeholders in the Gorse Action Group, we really identify who can do what. So what group is bringing what strength to the table. So for example, with the watersheds, we have a lot of experience with landowner outreach. That is kind of in our day-to-day wheelhouse. So we reach out to landowners who may have gorse on their property and are interested in controlling gorse. ODOT might be helpful for controlling gorse on right-of-ways, and they are. So we've set up contracts and things like that. So speaking of contracts, the watersheds are also skilled at devising contracts between landowners, things like that. So we do on the ground work. We do landscape scale projects. We do smaller projects too, but for these bigger landscape scale, we're talking about whole hillsides filled with gorse. Of course, that's gonna take funding. So the Gorse Action Group is not a legal entity into its own. The Gorse Action Group cannot hold grants on its own. So part of what I wanna stress to people forming groups like this is from the outset, really critical to confront and talk about financing. And also who is gonna coordinate with potential funders. So who is the best person to be the middleman, the middlewoman? All of those things are really helpful, and I'm sure that some of the other groups can contest to talk about that in the beginning. So who is the fiscal sponsor? Who is gonna hold the money? Things like that. So, what we've learned in terms of trying to get funding for these big landscape scale projects is that the watersheds can write the grant since we're grant funded. We do a lot of grant writing, but we need capacity to be able to do that. So because we're 100% grant funded, I really want to contribute to the Gorse Action Group, but I need money to be able to write the grant, things like that. So currently, we have a capacity grant with Wild Rivers Coast Alliance out of Bandon, Oregon, and they contribute funding to us so we can devise these projects. We can coordinate with landowners, we can attend meetings. What we have done, this is our second year getting such grant. We kind of rotate who is going to be holding the funds, and then we all contribute to the reporting of what we have gotten done. Another thing we do in terms of, fuel is mapping. So we've done a big mapping project because Gorse was centered kind of further south of Coos County, in the southern part of Coos County and in Curry County. However, we're seeing this spread northward and eastward as well. So we really wanted to get a sense of where all the different infestations are, no matter how small, to get a sense of the movements. And then we can track, what we're doing. Are we doing, what are we doing per year to decrease that percentage of gorse in the area? So having the identifiable problem, if you can pinpoint areas where there's fuel to be controlled, and then having as many stakeholders or interested stakeholders, and really asking, what those stakeholders can bring to the table. I think early on in the Gorse Action Group, before it officially formed, there were a lot of meetings about, wanting to do projects and how to do them. But it was just recently, in the past 5 years or so, where we actually organized enough to get funding for some of these projects. And we've been very successful. So we don't currently get fire dollars. Our tact is more about each landowner. So that can be, Bandon Dunes, that can be, the right of ways, that can be individual landowners. Most people in this area know the devastating impact of gorse. So usually there's not a lot of persuasion that needs to happen. It's more about, just coordinating all of these different entities. So we have meetings quarterly, and we usually, update each other what each entity is doing. And then we also, now with these capacity grants, we're able to do, bigger projects. So we are able to do more than what we could do collectively, but it has taken a little while for us to get to that point. Let's see. Another thing I want to stress is, there were a lot of roadblocks in us, forming who's going to do what, that type of thing. So just know there's going to be some roadblocks. It was very messy in terms of us, forming the Gorse Action Group. But we're very action oriented. So now that we have this identifiable problem, we have some methods down that have proven successful that we can share with landowners. So that's taken quite a while to iron out. But we've gotten a lot of great work done. It is a real testament to having diverse stakeholders in a group to prevent this fire damage that Gorse can cause. And I just want to let anyone know that we can post my email address if anyone has questions about the Gorse Action Group or how we formed, or any other questions. I'm happy to answer those questions on this webinar, or feel free to email me.
Okay, thank you so much, Lucy. Really appreciate your contribution. You can feel free to enter your email directly into the chat to all panelists and all attendees if you like. And moving on, we'll move on to our last speaker, Boone Zimmerlee. Take it away, Boone. Thank you so much.
Okay, so yeah, like Aaron just said, I'm Boone Zimmerlee. I work for Deschutes County as the Fire Adapted Communities Coordinator, and then within those duties, one of my jobs is the Program Director of Project Wildfire. So what I'm hoping to do is kind of talk through Project Wildfire, give you guys kind of an idea of what we do, and then leave you with a couple things to think about as you're wanting to coordinate efforts in your own local area. So Project Wildfire, right, the goal is right there: aim to prevent deaths, injuries, property loss, and environmental damage resulting from wildfires in Deschutes County. So pretty ambitious goal, right? But we don't do it alone. We do it with a lot of partners. So thinking about Project Wildfire and what we are, most folks know us through our webpage or through a lot of the different projects that we have. But if you go to our webpage, and I'm not going to do that today because I can get lost in all of the different things that we have there that we're offering to folks, but you can find things like the community wildfire protection plans, which are something that was mentioned earlier by Michael. You can find all the plans that cover our county. We've got 5 within Deschutes County. You can find resources for evacuations, kind of what to prepare for, what to think about as you prepare. Lots of resources for Firewise communities as far as defensible space, and just resources on how to become Firewise. We've got maps of the communities and different things there. We talked a little bit about fire adapted communities as a whole. We've got resources for prescribed fire, just kind of the need for it in our ecosystem, because remember, we're on the east side of the Cascades. We're definitely in a fire adapted ecosystem over here, where we see repeated fires yearly, with most of our fire return intervals naturally would be somewhere in that 5 to 35 fire return interval. And then also we have lots of resources for finding notes from our steering committee, recordings from some of our meetings, and some of the topics that we've talked about. And without going to the webpage, it's kind of hard to visualize what we are, but we're an organization that helps kind of bridge the gap anywhere from local residents all the way up to the federal agencies. So in 2004, there was an ordinance that was written that actually formed Project Wildfire, including a steering committee that was made up of all of our partners, from HOA members or local residents. Got a lot of residents at large on our steering committee, lots of businesses, Forest Service, BLM, Oregon Department of Forestry, several fire departments. We also have participation from DEQ, insurance agencies, and among many others. But, we reach out and we do a lot of work, right? So when you look at this chart here, I'm not going to go around the whole picture, but there's a lot of things that we're involved with and that we help make the connections for. And we can't do that without all those partners that I just listed. So we try to stay actively engaged with all of those folks. So it's a continual job to be able to reach out, build that network, and then continue to hold on to that network and build those relationships. But lots of things in there, anything from partners to grants to education to fuels treatment, among many, many more things. So the history of how this kind of came about, not so different from this last fire season. You know, in 1990, we had the Aubrey Hall fire that moved across the west side of Bend. Several homes were destroyed, nothing compared to last year, but it was significant to the state of Oregon. And then in 1996, again, we had the Skeleton fire that moved across the south end of Bend, burned several homes again. And, you know, and that was definitely significant to Deschutes County, but it also is significant to Oregon as a whole from that Senate Bill 360, or also known as Oregon Wildland Urban Interface Law, was came out of that. And what that did was helped us to just kind of be able to frame up that that not just fire departments are responsible for these fires that impact our wildland urban interface, but also residents have a piece of that as well. We begin to kind of see that picture of what it takes to be part of that fire adapted community. So through that, we've got a lot more kind of standardized nomenclature and stuff from Senate Bill 360 and defensible space, but also out of that, one of the things that came forward was an insurance company had stepped forward and said they wanted to, out of the Skeleton fire particularly, they wanted to give the city some funds to buy another engine to increase capacity. And at the time, one of the fire marshals had the foresight to say, well, we don't want another engine. An engine would only help us protect one home. What we'd like to do is build a program to reach out and influence multiple folks where we would be potentially saving multiple homes and not just one. And out of that was born Fire Free, which is an educational outreach program along with some events that we hold yearly to clean up yard debris. Well, they built Fire Free, and then Fire Free continued to grow. And as it grew, there became the need for Project Wildfire to help coordinate between all those entities, between the fire departments and everyone. So when the first kind of versions of Fire Free came around, you know, it was a contracted position that the county held the contract for. One of the local fire districts paid in for part of the funding for that position, and the county took over the other part of the funds. And then it was recognized across all of the agencies, you know, across the federal agencies and the state agencies, that there was a need for this position to help coordinate between one another so that we could start consolidating the work and prioritizing our projects and getting work done more efficiently. So Project Wildfire came out of that. And then most recently, we kind of changed the way that Project Wildfire was, the funding had kind of changed a little bit. The district doesn't pay into it as much anymore, as the county's kind of taken more control over that contract, to where they were paying all of the funds into it coming out of Title III funding for the most part, along with a little bit of grant money. And now they turned that into an official county position. And that's when I entered into the Project Wildfire job, was as they turned it into a regular full-time county employee. So one of the things, I guess, while I'm on this, just wanted to say that, right, this is a full-time job, takes a lot of work and coordination to do. So some of the things that we do manage out of all that are our CWPPs. Like I said, there's 7 of them across the county. Every 5 years, we update those. If you're not familiar with the CWPP, it houses, it's a non-regulatory document that all of our partners across the spectrum, we all agree to share our accomplishments, identify priorities, and it helps us kind of leverage one another's work to apply for grant funding, other projects that we work on out there. And we update those every 5 years, and Project Wildfire provides that place for those updates and to work on that stuff. Fire Free is one of our programs. Like I mentioned, it started off in 1996 and it continues to today. So today it's more of a yearly event that everybody is aware of for the most part throughout the county. I think it'd be pretty tough to find somebody that's lived here for a few years that isn't aware of the Fire Free program, but we have events where this year we'll be opening up 3 weekends in the 2 weeks in between at the landfills and the transfer stations for people to bring yard debris. So we do a campaign of increasing your defensible space and getting stuff to the landfill. Partnerships and projects. We have projects across the spectrum. There's a lot of stuff that we work on, but one of the larger ones I thought would show as an example is our Buttes to Basin. So this is a Joint Chiefs project. And this is our latest one that we've been working on. It's a multi-year project. It's got and it's multi-millions that we multi-million project as well, where Forest Service, NRCS, the state, ourselves, our local fire departments, if we can keep them involved or if they're able to be involved, along with the soil and watershed conservation districts, we all come together, identify project areas, identify the needs, and then we put these proposals forward and we apply for the state or apply for funds. And then that funding comes back to us and we all have our pieces of the pie to that greater landscape kind of initiative. So anything from the stuff that you see on the left where it's curbside chipping for neighborhoods, which is what we get directly involved with, to large prescribed fire operations and forest health things that are happening on the forested lands. Anyway, final thoughts, right? Catalyst, right? We recognize the need out there. So we had our fires lately. We've had this last summer, which is also a catalyst to a lot of change I think that we're going to see coming out of legislation this year. Partnerships, being able to partner with other folks and being able to align our goals. And then having that committed coordinator, somebody that can take on the work because it's far beyond, in my opinion, what a volunteer would normally be able to do. And then we also work towards becoming that household name and building that recognition for all to see and know who we are.
I would like to thank you all. I'd like to thank the presenters and panelists that made this webinar happen, and then also to all of you, the public, for joining us. We recognize that many are still recovering from a really hard wildfire season, and we appreciate you tuning into these webinars to get yourselves, your family, and your communities prepared for the next wildfire season. Don't forget to join us 2 weeks from now, same day and time, Wildfire Wednesdays at 12 p.m. on April 28th. This webinar will cover planning for safe evacuation, prepare your family and home ahead of time for the possibility of having to evacuate. A reminder that this webinar has been recorded and feel free to share it out. We will send a follow-up email with all the resources included, including the Q&A that wasn't answered live. Finally, if you have a moment, please tell us what you thought about today's presentations by filling out a brief survey immediately following the webinar. A pop-up window should appear in your browser. Stay safe, everyone, and see you in 2 weeks for Wildfire Wednesdays, Fire Prepared, Fire Aware. Thank you.